For the living who feel already dead, rise, I call you by name. There's a kind of exhaustion that sleep can't fix. A kind of heaviness that no amount of distraction can lift. You wake up, go through the motions, say all the right things, smile when needed, but inside something's gone quiet. Like a light's been dimmed. Like part of you is still lying in a place you left behind but never really walked away from. You're breathing, you're functioning, you're alive. But somewhere along the way it started to feel like you were just surviving. Just getting by. Just existing. Maybe no one around you can see it. Maybe you've become good at hiding it, because you're the one who holds everyone else together. Or maybe it's obvious, and the people who once stood close have started to pull away, unsure of how to handle the emptiness they see in your eyes. Either way, something in you knows, this isn't how you were meant to live. This can't be all there is. If that's you, I want you to hear this, not as a phrase or a cliché, but as a voice cutting through the fog of your soul. Rise, I call you by name. Those aren't just poetic words. That's a divine declaration. That's Jesus standing at the edge of your tomb. The one you've been lying in while still alive, and refusing to let death have the final say. That's the God of the universe, not just seeing your pain, but speaking directly into it. Not calling out to the crowd. Not speaking to a faceless group, but calling you by name. See, the Bible isn't a book about perfect people who always had it together. It's the story of the broken, the buried, the forgotten, and the lifeless being found and raised by a relentless God. And maybe that's where you are right now, somewhere between numb and gone. But you're here, and that means something in you still wants to live again. Still wants to believe again. Still wants to rise. This message is not a bandage for your wounds. It's not a pep talk or a feel-good moment. It's a resurrection call. Because when Jesus calls the dead to life, it's not optional. It's transformative. So if you've been walking around feeling dead inside, like your soul's been buried under the weight of life, this is your moment. Not to pretend you're okay, but to finally hear the one who knows how to bring you back. He's not calling your trauma. He's not calling your failures. He's not calling a version of you you pretend to be. He's calling you by name to rise. Let's talk about what happens next. Number 1, the living dead. Recognizing the quiet grave inside. There's a kind of death that doesn't come with a casket or a funeral. It doesn't wear black or bring flowers. It just settles in quietly. It shows up in the way your prayers have grown cold, in how worship feels distant, in how joy has become something you remember, not something you experience. You're still walking, still talking, still showing up to church or work or family dinners, but something in you has gone silent. This is what it means to feel like the living dead. Not because you don't have a heartbeat, but because your hope has flatlined, because somewhere along the way, your faith got tired, your heart got bruised, your soul stopped dancing. Maybe it was the divorce that shattered more than just your marriage. Maybe it was the unanswered prayer that made you question if God even sees you. Maybe it was the betrayal, the burnout, the diagnosis, the chronic silence of heaven. And if you're honest, you stopped expecting life to get better. You stopped asking God for more. You stopped dreaming because it hurt too much to keep hoping. The Bible is full of people who walked this road. Job sat in ashes and said, "My days are over. My hopes have disappeared. My heart's desires are broken." Job 17:11, NLT. Elijah, after seeing fire fall from heaven, collapsed under a tree and begged God to let him die. King David cried out, "Why are you downcast, O my soul? Why so disturbed within me?" You're not alone in this place. And more importantly, you're not forgotten in it. God doesn't overlook graves. He walks straight into them. In John 11, when Lazarus had been dead for 4 days, everyone had already made peace with the loss. The stone was in place. The mourning had begun. But Jesus didn't see a finished story. He saw a buried one, and he stood in front of that tomb and wept, not because he was powerless, but because he loved, because he felt the weight of death, even though he held the power to reverse it. If you've buried parts of yourself, your calling, your faith, your identity, your voice, Jesus is not intimidated by that tomb. He's already walking toward it. He's not asking you to climb out on your own. He's about to speak into it. But first, you've got to recognize it. You've got to stop pretending everything's fine when your soul is screaming for help. You've got to stop calling this survival normal, because you weren't made to live in a grave. You were made to rise. And it starts by admitting what's died. Number 2, I call you by name, the personal nature of God's voice. You are not a number in a crowd. You are not one prayer in a pile of billions. You are not just another face God has to manage. You are known fully, deeply, personally. Isaiah 43:1 says, "Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine." Let that sink in. God doesn't call us by our shame, our sins, or our stories. He calls us by name. Not, "Hey, you over there." Not sinner number 24-3. Not the one who messed up again. He looks at the tomb that has held you in silence, and he says, "Your name come out." Think back to Lazarus. Jesus didn't stand in front of the tomb and say, "Hey, someone come back." He said, "Lazarus, come forth." It was specific, intentional, personal. Because resurrection is never vague. It always has a name attached to it. Jesus is calling you. Not the version of you that claims up well on Sundays. Not the person others expect you to be. Not who you wish you were. He's calling the tired, burned out, hollow version of you that you've been dragging through each day. And here's what makes his voice different. When God speaks, it's not just noise, it's creation. When he said, "Let there be light," the sun was born. When he said, "Peace, be still," the storm stopped. When he said, "Lazarus, come forth," a dead man breathed again. So when he says, "I call you by name," he's not just reminding you who you are. He's reawakening what's gone dormant in you. Your name, spoken by God, becomes a spark. It's what pulls identity out of confusion, purpose out of pain, and life out of what's been buried. And that voice? It's not angry. It's not impatient. It's not filled with disappointment. It's filled with compassion. It's the same voice that found Hagar alone in the desert. The same voice that whispered to Samuel in the night. The same voice that restored Peter after he denied Jesus 3 times. He knows your name, even if you've forgotten who you are, even if everyone else has moved on, even if you feel too broken, too far gone, too tired. He still speaks. He still calls. And he still knows exactly where to find you. Not just to comfort you, but to raise you. Number 3, the grave clothes we wear. What's wrapping you in death? When Jesus called Lazarus out of the tomb, it wasn't over yet. He had come back to life, but he was still bound. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." John 11:44 NIV. Don't miss that. Just because you're breathing again doesn't mean you're free. Resurrection brings life, but there's still a process of unwrapping what death left behind. Some of us have heard the call. We've responded. We've said yes to Jesus, but we're still walking through life, tangled up in things that were never meant to stay on us. Grave clothes don't belong on the living. What are yours? For some, it's shame, the kind that clings to your memory like a bad smell. You've confessed it, repented, tried to move on, but something in you still believes you'll always be that mistake. For others, it's unforgiveness toward someone who hurt you, or toward yourself. Maybe bitterness has become a protective shell. You wear it like armor. but it's slowly choking the life out of you. Maybe your grave clothes look like addiction, or fear, or comparison. Maybe it's depression, and you've started to believe the lie that healing is for others but not for you. Maybe it's religion without relationship. You know how to perform, how to serve, how to lead, but your heart hasn't felt alive in years. Whatever it is, it's wrapped itself around your identity, around your movement, around your vision. Lazarus came out, but he couldn't walk into his future until the grave clothes came off. And Jesus didn't just leave him there. He told others to help take off the grave clothes and let him go. That's the beauty of community. That's the power of walking with others who will help unwrap what's been suffocating you. We were never meant to peel away layers of death on our own. But let me be clear, what bound you doesn't define you. Grave clothes are not permanent. They're not who you are. They were meant to be removed. Some of you have accepted that this is just your life now, bound, limited, silenced. But Jesus didn't bring you back to life just to have you stay wrapped in what killed you. He didn't call you out of the tomb so you could shuffle around half free. He called you to walk, to breathe, to see, to move. And that means letting him, and sometimes others, pull off what you've been wearing for far too long. The grave couldn't keep you. Don't let the grave clothes do it either. Number 4, rise up. The command that revives the soul. Rise isn't a suggestion. It's not a motivational quote. It's a command, a divine summons backed by the full authority of heaven. When Jesus stood before the widow's dead son in Luke 7, he didn't whisper hope, he spoke life. Young man, I say to you, get up. And the dead sat up. When he healed the paralyzed man in John 5, he didn't give him a therapy session. He said, rise, take up your mat, and walk. And the man who had been stuck for 38 years stood to his feet. God never calls people to try harder. He speaks, and when he does, the words carry the power to make it happen. When he tells you to rise, he's not asking you to figure out how. He's commanding your spirit to respond. There's power in that. Resurrection power. Because when the creator of the universe says rise, your soul doesn't get to argue. Depression doesn't get the last word. Addiction doesn't get the veto. Trauma doesn't get to stay in charge. His word creates what it calls out. You don't have to feel strong to rise. You don't even have to fully understand it. You just have to respond. Think of Peter walking on the water. Jesus didn't give him a plan. He just said, come, and Peter did something impossible. Because the command carried supernatural strength. The same is true for you. If your heart feels paralyzed by fear, Jesus says, rise. If your joy has been buried under disappointment, Jesus says, rise. If your calling has been crushed under failure, Jesus says, rise. This isn't about mustering up the willpower to crawl out of your situation. This is about trusting that when God calls you, he also equips you. Even if you still feel weak. Even if nothing in your situation has changed yet. Even if you don't know what tomorrow holds. His voice cuts through the noise. And it says, get up. Not because you're strong, but because he is. So rise not in your own strength, but in the strength of the one who stood in your grave, called your name, and gave you back your life. Number 5, God in the dark. Where is he when I can't feel him? Silence can be the loudest sound in a storm. It's one thing to suffer when you feel close to God, to cry, to hurt, but still sense his presence beside you. But what about when the heavens go quiet? What about when your prayers hit the ceiling and fall back down unanswered? What about when the worship songs feel hollow? When the scriptures don't move you? When you're doing all the right things but he still feels far away? That kind of darkness doesn't just test your faith. It wears it thin. It tempts you to believe that God has moved on, that he's grown tired of your mess, that maybe you did something wrong, or worse, maybe he was never there at all. But let me speak into that space with truth. God's silence is not his absence. He was silent before Lazarus got up. He delayed on purpose. John 11 says, when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. That verse used to make me uncomfortable. Why would Jesus wait, knowing someone he loved was dying? Why not rush in immediately like the hero we expect him to be? Because sometimes God lets things die so he can raise them up in a way that leaves no doubt who did it. If he showed up immediately, it would have been a healing, but he was planning a resurrection. You see, delay doesn't mean denial. Just because it's not happening on your timeline doesn't mean he's not working on it. And sometimes the silence is not punishment, it's preparation. Remember, when Jesus stood before Lazarus' tomb, the crowd didn't know what he was about to do. All they saw was the stone. All they felt was the loss. But Jesus saw the bigger story. He said, this sickness will not end in death. It is for God's glory. John 11:4. Your silence might be the stage being set for something greater than you can imagine. Psalm 88 is one of the darkest psalms in the Bible. It ends with no breakthrough, no victory, just pain. And yet it's included in the Holy Scriptures. Why? Because God isn't afraid of your darkness. He validates it. He meets you in it. Even when you don't feel him. Even when your prayers feel weak and repetitive. Even when it seems like nothing's changing. He's still there. He's the God who waited not because he didn't care, but because he was setting the scene for something that would bring glory. So don't confuse his silence with abandonment. He's still writing, and when the time is right, he will speak. And when he does, even the dead things in you won't be able to stay buried. Number 6. Bones will live again. Hope from the valley of dry bones. If you've ever felt beyond repair, like too much damage has been done, this part is for you. God once brought a prophet to a place most of us avoid, the valley of dry bones. Not just dead people, dry bones, lifeless, scattered, sun-bleached remains of what used to be. There was no hope of resurrection, no sign of life, just a wasteland of what was. And God asked Ezekiel a question. Son of man, can these bones live? Ezekiel 37:3. Let's be honest. Ezekiel didn't say yes. He said, Sovereign Lord, you alone know. In other words, I don't see it, but maybe you do. That's the tension of hope, isn't it? You want to believe. But when you're staring at pieces instead of people, when the dream is dead, the marriage is cold, the calling feels wasted, your faith whispers, I don't know if it's possible anymore. And that's when God tells Ezekiel to do something strange. Prophesy to these bones. Speak to the dead. He doesn't say pray for them. He says speak. Use your voice. Declare what seems impossible. Dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. And as Ezekiel speaks, the bones rattle. They come together. Tendons form. Flesh grows. And then God breathes. This is what God does. He speaks into what looks hopeless, and then he tells you to speak too. He says, prophesy to your emptiness. Declare my truth over what feels finished. Speak life to the dry places in your heart. Not because you're trying to hype yourself up, but because his word has creative power. And when you declare it, even trembling, even through tears, it sets things in motion. Dry bones can still hear. Dead things still respond to the voice of God. And your valley, it's not the end, it's the beginning of an army. Because God didn't just revive individuals, he raised up a force, a testimony. So if you've given up on yourself, if you've written off your future, if you've accepted that this is how things will always be, I dare you to ask the question again. Can these bones live? Because God is already answering. He's already breathing. and the bones are already rattling. Number 7. From death to destiny. Living as someone who has risen. Resurrection is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of one. When Jesus called Lazarus out of the tomb, he didn't just give him life back. He gave him purpose. In fact, not long after Lazarus rose, he was sitting at a table with Jesus while others came from miles away just to see him. He became living proof of what God can do. His very presence preached a sermon without saying a word. That's what happens when God raises someone. He doesn't just restore breath to your lungs. He restores meaning to your days. Because you weren't raised to wander. You weren't brought back to life to go back to hiding. You weren't rescued just to survive. You were raised to carry something, to be something, to do something. Ephesians 2:10 says, "For we are God's masterpiece, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." If the enemy couldn't kill you, he'll try to convince you your life doesn't matter. But it does. Because when you rise from the ashes, you carry fire in your bones. You become a witness, not of your strength, but of His power. You become the person who walks into rooms still smelling like the grave, and people can't help but ask, "How are you even still standing?" And your answer is simple: Jesus called my name. Some of you have believed the lie that because of your past, you're disqualified from purpose. But your story is not your disqualification. It's your platform. The scars you carry, they become your ministry. The pit you fell into, it becomes your testimony. The darkness you walked through, it becomes your authority to speak into someone else's pain. You don't have to be a pastor or a preacher. Just live like someone who's alive again. Forgive like someone who's been forgiven. Serve like someone who was saved. Love like someone who was rescued from hate. And don't be afraid to tell your story, because someone else is still in the tomb, waiting to hear that resurrection is possible. God didn't call you out just to heal you. He called you out so others could see Him through you. You were dead, but now you live. And the life you live now, it has a name. It's called destiny. Conclusion. Maybe your soul has been whispering for a while now, asking questions you didn't dare say out loud. Is it too late for me? Has too much died? Can I ever feel alive again? Let me tell you what I believe, with everything in me. If you're still breathing, God's still calling. The world may have written you off. Religion may have boxed you in. Your own heart may have grown numb. But Jesus, He stands at the edge of every tomb. And He speaks into every silence. And He's not just speaking a word. He's speaking your name. Rise, I call you by name, not to shame you, not to scold you, but to resurrect you. This isn't a motivational speech. This is a holy moment, a divine interruption in your story. Because God never speaks without purpose. And if He is speaking to you now, it means something is about to come alive. Maybe for the first time in years you feel that flicker, hope-stirring tears rising. Something moving deep inside where it's been quiet for too long. Don't ignore it. Don't silence it. That's resurrection beginning. So what do you do now? You rise. You walk out of the grave. You let Him unwrap what's been holding you. You listen for His voice again. And you live, not as someone barely getting by, but as someone who has stood face to face with death and heard the voice of life say, "You're not done." Because you're not. Your story's not over. The tomb is open. And He's calling you by name. So go ahead. Rise.